They said the coffin was never supposed to be opened, that what lay inside should remain sealed forever, buried with the crimes of the Nazi elite. But decades after the fall of Hitler's regime, rumors exploded. Someone had broken the silence. Someone had opened the coffin of Magda Goebbels, the cold-blooded mother who murdered her own 6 children in Hitler's bunker before dying alongside her husband, Joseph Goebbels. Who dared disturb her grave, and why? Was it a secret Soviet autopsy, a covert ritual, or something even darker? The story is buried in classified reports, scorched bodies, and conflicting witness accounts. But where official records end, conspiracy begins. In this deep investigation, we uncover what really happened to Magda Goebbels' remains. Did someone truly open her coffin? And if so, what did they see inside? The truth is more twisted than you think. To understand why the alleged opening of Magda Goebbels' coffin stirs such intense curiosity, we must first understand who she was and the monstrous legacy she left behind. Born in 1901, Magda was a woman of privilege, charm, and ambition. After a failed first marriage, she met and married Joseph Goebbels, Adolf Hitler's trusted minister of propaganda. Quickly, she ascended to a terrifying kind of royalty, not just as the wife of a top Nazi official, but as a public symbol of the Nazi family ideal. Behind closed doors, however, her devotion ran even deeper. She wasn't just a political wife, she was fanatically loyal to Hitler, referring to him as a savior and insisting that her children belonged to the Führer, not the world. That blind devotion led her to commit an unspeakable crime. On May 1, 1945, deep in the Führer bunker, she and Joseph poisoned all 6 of their children before taking their own lives. Magda Goebbels became, in the eyes of history, the embodiment of Nazi fanaticism, a mother who murdered her children for an idea. It is this horrifying legacy that makes the mystery of her coffin's opening all the more chilling. When Soviet troops stormed the shattered ruins of Berlin in May 1945, they discovered a gruesome scene outside Hitler's bunker. Several partially burned bodies, hastily doused in petrol, lay in a shallow crater. Among them were the remains of Joseph and Magda Goebbels. But the Goebbels' attempt to destroy their bodies, like Hitler's, had been rushed and incomplete. Soviet officials quickly identified the corpses, photographing and documenting them before beginning a bizarre, secretive journey that would see the couple's remains exhumed, buried, moved, and hidden multiple times over the following decades. Initially buried in a shell crater near the Chancellery, the bodies were secretly moved by Soviet forces to various locations in East Germany. By 1970, the KGB had had enough. Afraid that the burial site in Magdeburg could become a neo-Nazi shrine, they ordered the Goebbels' remains, along with those of Hitler's top aides, to be dug up one final time. The bodies were cremated thoroughly, their ashes mixed and scattered in the Elbe River. This repeated disturbing of the dead, under strict secrecy, is what fuels theories about a forbidden opening. In truth, the Soviets did open the burial site, more than once, and the remains were handled without public knowledge. Was Magda's coffin ever opened for scientific or ritualistic reasons? It's difficult to say, but what we do know is that her body was never allowed to rest, and that fact alone is enough to raise questions. Some say it happened in the dead of night. Others claim it was a clandestine Soviet autopsy. Then there are those who whisper about occult rituals, dark powers, and Nazi relic hunters. The idea that someone, anyone, opened the coffin of Magda Goebbels without authorization has become a magnetic piece of modern myth. But where does this story come from? The myth likely began with the Soviets themselves. After recovering the bodies in May 1945, they transported them to secret locations, away from public scrutiny. Autopsies were conducted on the charred remains of Hitler, Eva Braun, and the Goebbels couple. Reports leaked years later described Magda's dental records being used for identification. Yet because the Soviets tightly controlled all documentation and released conflicting reports, suspicion spread. What were they hiding? Then came the 1970 exhumation in Magdeburg. Soviet agents dug up the graves of Magda, Joseph Goebbels, and others, cremated the remains, and scattered the ashes. This process was never publicly announced at the time. When documents emerged decades later, conspiracy theorists pounced. Why so secret if there was nothing to hide? Some more extreme claims suggest the coffin was opened earlier, perhaps by Nazi loyalists trying to preserve artifacts or by occultists obsessed with Nazi mysticism. But there is no evidence to support these theories. The forbidden opening narrative thrives on what is missing: missing photos, missing reports, missing graves. When facts vanish into the fog of war and Cold War secrecy, myth rushes in to fill the silence. In a world obsessed with secret knowledge and buried truths, the story of Magda Goebbels' coffin being forbiddenly opened is too tempting to die. Even without solid proof, the myth refuses to fade, and there are several powerful reasons why. First, there's the seductive pull of conspiracy. When governments, especially ones as secretive as the Soviet Union, withhold information, people instinctively suspect deception. The Soviets documented the remains of top Nazis in private, buried them in unmarked graves, and later destroyed those graves without telling anyone. To some, that silence speaks louder than any official report. Second, the Nazis have become a dark symbol in modern mythology, a source of endless speculation, from hidden gold trains to Antarctic bases. Magda Goebbels, as the mother who killed her children for Hitler, stands at the center of that black legend. Her remains carry symbolic weight. Touching them, opening them, is seen by some as unlocking a portal into Nazi evil itself. Third, popular culture fuels the fire. Books, documentaries, and YouTube videos often blur the line between fact and fiction. A single misleading title or image can reignite the rumor, and once the idea is in the public mind, it's hard to erase. Lastly, there's morbid curiosity. The idea of violating the grave of such a monstrous figure, whether out of vengeance, investigation, or madness, appeals to our darker instincts. It's not just about history. It's about power, secrets, and the forbidden. Despite the swirling rumors, historians have reached a firm consensus on what really happened to Magda Goebbels after her death, and none of it involves supernatural intrigue or secret cults. Official Soviet records, though once classified, confirm that Magda's body was partially burned outside the Führerbunker. Her identity was verified by dental records, and autopsy reports, though incomplete and sometimes contradictory, were documented. She was buried in multiple locations by Soviet forces along with Joseph Goebbels and others, eventually ending up in Magdeburg. In 1970, the KGB ordered the final disposal of these remains. The graves were opened, the bodies cremated fully, and the ashes dumped into the Elbe River. This was done explicitly to prevent any future veneration or Nazi memorial site from forming. There is no credible evidence, no eyewitness account, no document, no photograph to support the idea that her coffin was opened in a forbidden or unauthorized way outside these state-sanctioned actions. Historians acknowledge that the Soviet secrecy contributed to the aura of mystery, but the events themselves are well recorded. In short, while the myth is powerful, the facts are clearer than most expect. What haunts us is not mystery, but the monstrous reality we already know. Despite the swirling rumors, historians have reached a firm consensus on what really happened to Magda Goebbels after her death, and none of it involves supernatural intrigue or secret cults. Official Soviet records, though once classified, confirmed that Magda's body was partially burned outside the Führerbunker. Her identity was verified by dental records, and autopsy reports, though incomplete and sometimes contradictory, were documented. She was buried in multiple locations by Soviet forces, along with Joseph Goebbels and others, eventually ending up in Magdeburg. In 1970, the KGB ordered the final disposal of these remains. The graves were opened, the bodies cremated fully, and the ashes dumped into the Elbe River. This was done explicitly to prevent any future veneration or Nazi memorial site from forming. There is no credible evidence, no eyewitness account, no document, no photograph to support the idea that her coffin was opened in a forbidden or unauthorized way outside these state-sanctioned actions. Historians acknowledge that the Soviet secrecy contributed to the aura of mystery, but the events themselves are well recorded. So, if everything is already known, why does this one question, was her coffin secretly opened, still send a chill down our spines?